Welcome to Behind the Confident Smile. I am your host, Bianca Cotton, and I am back with Elle Davis.
Hey, girl.
Welcome back. Thank you so much for episode 1 and committing to doing a part 2. Talking about picking up the pieces after Paul passed.
Okay, I don't know what's going to be more difficult, the one we already did or this next one.
We'll see. So what does picking up the pieces after your spouse passed mean to you?
Ooh, that is a big question. And so what I will say first and foremost is that question of like, how do I, right? Like I remember thinking maybe day 2 after he passed, I was like, so now what? Now what am I supposed to do? How am I going to do whatever it is I'm supposed to do? And just how and what? And so it probably after the funeral is when I went into kind of overdrive of like, okay, I need therapy, right? I have a background in social work. So therapy has always been, since I was a young adult, very important to me. So I was just like, I need a therapist. Simone need a therapist. Like, we all need, like, you get a therapist, you get a therapist. Like, everybody need therapy. But she was 2, right? My daughter was 2. I was just like, do I send a 2-year-old to therapy? Is that even a thing? So I immediately, I started researching and just figuring out, what does it look like for a child to lose a parent? Do they go into therapy at 2 years old? And so I found a therapist who specialized, but I was like, I'll go see this lady first. And if I need to bring Simone, then I will, but let's figure that out. So for a while, I actually went to 2 therapists. One who helped me give language to communicate with Simone about the death and what happened, and then one for my own sanity. So that was really important. And I think, what people don't think about with therapy is I was very clear on what type of therapist I needed. Like, what are some of the characteristics I needed in a therapist? And so I was like, she has to be a Black woman. She has to have been married. I didn't care so much whether or not she had children. But I wanted her to be a Black woman, married, Christian, because those were things that were really important to my husband and I, just in terms of our values. And so that was important to me. And so luckily I found that in one therapist right away, and I saw her for a year.
That's amazing. Oftentimes people do not get it on the first try.
Girl.
So what clicked for the both of you?
She was just very empathetic and very soothing. And so when your world is shaken up and chaotic, you need calm, right? You need somebody who's going to come into your space and just be calm. And so when I went into her office, I felt very okay. I felt good. I felt calm. And she was careful and considerate. She was very careful with her words in terms of how she would say things. This is kind of moving fast forward, but this is one of the funny stories. We were close to the year mark, and she didn't know how to say whether or not I was okay with moving on at some point, right? So she wasn't trying to push me to be put that behind you, it's time to move on. But she was just in hopes that one day. And so I was like, oh yeah, one day I want to be remarried again. She was like, oh, okay, thank goodness. She was like, I didn't know how to say that. I didn't know what to, what to say. And I was just like, oh no, I'm good. I'm clear. I definitely want to be remarried again. And so she was like, okay, great.
Wow. And the other therapist that helped you with language to tell Simone, what was that process like?
So that was very different, right? And that was very different for a couple of reasons. It was an older woman who, when I went in her office, she had all these toys and stuff because she did play therapy with children. And here I am, the adult coming in. But what was helpful, and I probably only saw her maybe 3 or 4 times, but what was very helpful is Simone never said, where is my daddy, right? when she finally did say something about it, which was probably about 3 weeks after Paul passed, she said, I want my daddy. She never said, where is he or what happened, but she just said, I want my daddy. And I was like, oh, so this baby knows. Like, for me, from a spiritual perspective, I felt like she knew. And so, but what I was never saying was just like, daddy died. I had never said daddy died. And the therapist was like, she's 2. She understands that plants die, bugs die. Like, she knows that. So you can use the language. You can use that word. And I was just like, but it feels so finite. And it's like, but it is, you know? And so, like, that was difficult. Like, that was difficult for me to, like, get to that place of just being like, this is what it is. But I'm grateful I did that, because otherwise I would have still kind of danced around it and found other ways to say it. But I needed to communicate that early on. And so as she got a little older and understood, you know, death a little bit more, like she my poor child. One time we were in the airport and she was like, my daddy died. Like, when she was like 4 or 5, and the woman was like, oh. And she was like, she looked at me like for like, you know, like assurance, like, ma'am, what is going on? And I was like, unfortunately, yes. I was like, and she's just owning it now. Like, she's getting into her space of being able to tell her own story and just not knowing that you don't just blurt that out to people at the airport.
Because they don't know what to do with it.
They have no idea what to do, right? So when she started school, like, I had to be very careful. Like, I always tell teachers, like, this is the story. Even as she's gotten older, I still tell teachers that, because if they're talking about things and she says that, I don't want the teacher to be totally surprised and not know what to do with the information.
That's really good. To, one, have the thoughts to say, hey, let me be proactive in her education and inform the teachers, this is our reality. And it kind of leans towards being trauma-informed, right? So they're not taken aback.
Exactly. I think it's the social worker in me, right?
I think so, too.
Like, even though I don't do, you know, traditional social work on an everyday basis, it's I have that social worker in me that's like, let's think about this as broader and big picture.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's dig into a little bit more about the parenting aspect of life after Paul passing. Take us on the journey.
Okay. How much time we got?
Like, what do I do with this 2-year-old now?
What do I do with the 2-year-old now? The solo mom. Okay. So I'm like trying to collect all of my thoughts, because there's so much, right? Because we're 8.5 years later, right? So now I have a 10.5-year-old who was a fresh 2-year-old when my husband passed. So we've gone through lots of life changes, and this solo mom journey, and I say solo mom very intentional, because I'm not a single mom. Like, I didn't choose, you know, that single motherhood. So I started using the term solo mom opposed to single mom, right? And so some of that is justification in my mind, right? Because when I think of a single mom, it's either someone who had a child with someone and they're not around, right? The relationship didn't work out. Or a woman who really chose to be a single parent, right? And so, but I just like the term solo mom, because it's like, for me, again, it's just justification. So on this solo mom journey, at first, I'll tell you, the first week, there was a week, maybe 3 or 4 weeks after Paul passed, and I had to do, within that first week, do bedtime and bath time, which were Paul's things. And I was like, what in the world? Think for myself during the day and get her to and from childcare. And at that time, I still wasn't cooking like regular. I hadn't gotten back to cooking regularly, and I wasn't working regularly at that time. But it was still a lot. Like, just even that, I was like, I got to do this every night, and I need to read her book, and I need to nurture her, and I need to care for her, and And. Like, that's how I felt. And. And I was just like, okay, Lord, this is a lot. And I think I had one of my biggest breaking moments, like, and when I say break, like crying in the car, calling my mama, fussing at Paul, fussing at Jesus, like all of the above, when I had to pick schools for her. It's time for her to go to kindergarten. And I had, made my list and, within Chicago Public Schools, I did the tests and did all this and didn't put pressure on her because I'm like, I know she's a smart little girl. I'm not going to let a system or a test tell me that she's not. But then making that decision, when it came down to me making a final decision, I had to think about how long I was going to have to travel. I had to think about me getting her up and after school and working as well as getting her to and from school. Bianca, when I tell you I was in my car bawling one day because I was like, this is too much. I was like, I'm not supposed to be making these decisions by myself. So that is one of the biggest pain points when you have this child and that you had this child with your husband and now your husband is no longer here. And you've got to do this by yourself.
Yeah.
And Village is great, but there's nothing like your partner.
Yeah.
Right? So, woo, okay.
And sitting with that, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm crying in the car, but that does not change my reality.
It doesn't. I still got to do it. I still got to make the decision.
Yes.
I still got to figure, at some point, be like, did I make the right decision? You sit with that, right?
Guessing.
And people kept saying, she's going to be where she's supposed to be. And I'm like, but is she? Because if Paul was here, I may have made a different decision.
But he's not.
But he's not.
So it's me. Ooh.
Won't think about that.
Right. So did you ever find yourself thinking too far ahead sometimes and getting overwhelmed? When it's time for her to go to college, how will I do that? And
no, girl, because I'm hoping I'll be remarried by then.
True.
If you out there watching, I am still single and available.
The ad.
Hello. My sign is a Leo.
August Leo. Okay, that's good. I'm glad you're still hopeful, right?
For
and
sure.
Still focused on, I'm open, I'm available.
Yes.
This is not the end of my story. Let's talk about the financial responsibility of being a solo parent.
Girl, it's expensive. So, and
living in Chicago, right?
And living in Chicago. So there's so many ways that I'm blessed though, right? And I say that because prior, regardless of what people think about renting, owning, all of this, right? People have their opinions. And I've owned at one point in my life and time. I don't own right now. I'm in the same place where Paul, Simone, and I live together. Okay. It happens to be a condo that is owned by a really good friend of mine. And we happened to move in after Simone, right around, Simone was 6 months when we moved in, and with the intention of we'll probably buy this condo at some point. So when Paul passed, my friend was don't worry about rent this month. I got it. You're good. Don't worry about it. The other part of that is it's a male friend. The other part of that is when anything is wrong, he takes care of it immediately. He's on it, right? I don't have to think about anything. So people are like, oh, why haven't you bought anything? Because right now I'm good.
You're taken care of.
I'm taken care of, right? And so we think will I buy again one day? Yeah, maybe. Is it the only path to wealth? It's not, right? It's not. And so I have very many intentions on like staying where I am because it's a good fit for me right now. I haven't paid a different amount of rent since we've moved there.
Wow.
There's been no increase, right?
That's a blessing.
That's a huge blessing because it's like I know how much is going towards my living expenses from year to year, right? And I've been self-employed off and on since 2009. So since even before Paul and I got married. I have gone back to work for a very short stint in a traditional role, but that was only for a short period of time. So I've always had to find ways to sustain Simone and I since Paul has passed. And it's not easy, but I also I'm blessed because I have skills that people need.
You surely do. You do.
You know, and so I've been able to use those skills that have garnered me great clients, right, in the work that I do. I support youth serving nonprofit clients primarily. And it's been wonderful. And it's not what I'm working on now is like structuring my business in a more sustainable way. And even like figuring out how to hire Simone within that business, right? So I've been asking her more recently, like, okay, you want to work for your mama, but you got to work, right? Like, I'm not just about to pay you and you're not actually going to do the work.
Right.
So we haven't wanted for anything since Paul has passed. Doesn't mean that there haven't been difficult times, because there have been times where I have wiped out my 401k, right? There have been times where I have ran up a credit card. And that's because I also have made the choice, though, not to work a traditional 9 to 5 so that I can have the freedom and flexibility to be there for my daughter. So that I can pick her up from school if need be, so that I can go on a field trip if she wants me to, so that I can do these other things. So really, when we think about life in general, whether we're with a partner or not, we have to figure out those values that are really important to us. And for me, it's really important to have the freedom and flexibility of a schedule to do what I need to do versus the money. If that makes sense.
It does. What I hear is you are clear on your values and how you want to live your life and willing to make those decisions, those tough decisions. Like, you know what? We may not be able to go out to eat today, but we're together. And that's what's most important.
Yeah. And so I find a way, right? Like, everybody got their thing. Like, some people have a shoe habit. Some people have a, whatever their thing is.
Starbucks.
Yeah. And so for me, it's been really important for me to provide her experiences. And so I find a way to do that. I will get a new client for us to take a trip, right? Like, that's important to me. Showing her the world and exposing her to, like, everything I possibly can. And for some widows, that's not the story, right? Like, for some widows, they may have more kids than I did, or whatever. And they find other challenges where they're like, how am I going to do this, right? Some people may even have had to leave their home, right? Like, we have had a stable ground regardless of anything. So it's been difficult because it's all on me, and I recognize that it's all on me. And probably what scares me more, now this is probably where I have looked into the future, right? Like, okay, what is this college, what is college going to be like? Or would I ever consider private school for her? Like, I'm a public school educated woman, so it's like I believe in the public school education, but sometimes you do see things and you're like, I may do something a little different,
right?
But I'm also thinking about, like, is that financial burden? Is that something that I want to take on? But I had a car that was already paid off until recently. I had to buy a car about 3 years ago. So I didn't have a car note for many of those years right after Paul passed. And he was a minimalist, so he didn't have a lot of debt. The debt that came into the relationship was for me, for my college debt and, my stuff. So.
Well, that's wonderful that you weren't left with a lot of debt, because that can lead to a lot of burden and stress. So how did you manage the stress? And how do you continue to manage it as well?
Oh, that's a great question, because it's not always very good. Like, this has been a stressful week. I even had a moment earlier this week where I was like, I did not sign up for this. Here I am 8 years later, still saying, I didn't sign up for this. This is some bull. I didn't sign up for this. So the stress comes and goes, right? At different times. I'm a spa girl. I love a good massage, right? So one of the things that I just implemented this year, and I did good for the first 8 months, and these last couple of months I've been struggling. But since my birthday is on the 8th, every month on the 8th, I would schedule a facial or a massage. And it was something for me to look forward to. It was my thing. I was like, yes, haven't been as good about that. So, got to get back there. I'm very honest with my daughter about needing time away and saying, mommy's taking this trip, or mommy's about to go out with her girlfriends because I need a break. I need to just let my hair down and be me.
That's good. It sounds like you have really cultivated an environment of vulnerability and honesty within your family. Was it always like that?
Girl, no. Because, my parents were teen parents. They grew up very different, right? And so I definitely didn't grow up in that way, per se. I think Paul and I tried to create that, though, right? Like, we tried to create this environment where it was like, okay to say, I don't have it all together. I don't know what to do in this moment, and I need help. And then I think when Paul passed, what I realized is that people wanted to help me, right? So also part of the story is that, I had girlfriends. I had 2 girlfriends in particular or 3, really. One ended up staying with me for about 4 or 5 months. And then 2 would switch off and would stay on the couch, literally sleeping on my couch to make sure that we were okay, to make sure I was okay, right after Paul passed. And they did that for a good 3 or 4 months. And they, okay, who needs to spend the night tonight? Who here? What's going on? And I was like, really? Y'all are showing up like that for me? So that allowed me to be even more vulnerable and say that it was okay to ask for the help because I had never done this, right? I didn't know what to do. Nobody in my circle had ever lost their husband. And again, I was 36.
Right.
I wasn't supposed to lose my husband at 36.
Right. Widow is not a picture of a 36-year-old woman with a child, a toddler.
Right?
That's not what we think of.
That's not what we think of. And there's so many of us, though. There's so many of us.
I'm proud of you for always being willing to share your story and help other widows on their journey.
Thank you.
Of resilience, healing, and fill in the blank, right? Whatever that means for them. And as you continue to go forward, I hope that these episodes really touch the hearts and the minds of those who even care for the widows in our society. Absolutely. And the children.
Thank you. And absolutely. And I will forever share that story. I will forever be a resource in whatever way I can. If it's just talking to, listening on the phone, holding up the phone, a hug, whatever it is, because it's hard.
Yeah. Well, you have heard it today, okay? From Elle Davis, 8.5 years later.
8.5 years later. And
she is able to sit here and smile and cry all in one segment, y'all. So I hope that you have taken something away from part 1 and 2. And thank you again for sharing as we take a collective breath.